Alright, I'm going to show you a quick tutorial on how to edit a cinemagraph using Final Cut Pro and Photoshop. But this technique really limits what you'll need Photoshop for. We'll be using Photoshop really just for the end GIF conversion. So let's get going. I've got my video recording loaded here into Final Cut. And this was one a student captured, and I'm just going to use that student's video for this tutorial. But one thing you notice at the beginning of the video, you probably have some camera movement shake from hitting the record button. So choose a few seconds from in the middle of the project. So I'll bring this down into my project here, and we don't need any sound for this. Now let's just play and see how much time I've got. So I brought in less than a second. I'm gonna grab a little bit more. So I'll just drag that out a little bit, and let's get, at least here's the 1 second mark. At least a second for this. So that's good. So here's what we're going to do. The first thing we need to tackle is creating the infinite loop point. Most of the times, the point that you randomly choose at the end of a clip and the first point in the project are not going to loop nicely together. Water is pretty abstract, so sometimes it does work well, but I would not count on it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click B on my keyboard, get my blade, and I'm going to cut this video somewhere in the middle, hit A to get back to arrow. I know that from this point, this frame, the last frame of this clip I just cut, and this are a perfect loop point because it's really just sequential frames in the video. So what I'm going to do is actually take the second half of the video file that I just created, and I'm going to drag it to the front of the project. So this right here will become the end of the project, and this frame right here will become the start, so that the ends will have a perfect loop point. So let's just take these clips and reverse them on the timeline. So now here's the point that was the bad loop frame originally. So if I play through this, it actually looked okay, but I wouldn't always count on that happening. So what we're going to do is click here and hit Command T. Command T creates a transition. I'll shrink this down a little bit, and I'll talk a second while that renders. But basically, I just created a dissolve over our loop frame so that now that has a seamless loop. When I play through it, you won't see any jumps. And these end frames were sequential frames side by side, so I know that's a perfect loop. So that's a really easy way to create a perfect loop with a cinemagraph where a cross dissolve is all you need for the loop frame. So with that, now what we need to do is create our mask so that what's inside of here is the only area that's actually moving. So what I'll do is I'll put my playhead at the end of my video. That's important. I'll come back up here and I'll grab a frame that was within our original selection, and I'll go to the edit menu, and I'm going to choose connect freeze frame. So here we go. There's our connected freeze frame. It will go down into your timeline where your playhead originally was, which in my case is at the end of the project. So now I can just drag this back to the beginning. I can trim it down so it's only the length of my original project, and I can delete this slug file right here. So I'll hit Shift Z again to zoom into our project. And now as you'll see, there's no more motion because we have a freeze frame at the top. So what we need to do is cut a hole in this frame just in the center here so that the only movement we have is what is in the middle. So I'm going to go to my filters. I'm going to go to masks and draw mask, and I'll drag this onto this top layer. Then I'll just quickly draw a mask. I don't have to be super precise with this because we're going to feather this mask. So I'll draw my mask, close the mask with the original point, and now what we just did, if I were to hide the bottom layer, you'll see that by default when you create a mask, only what's inside the selection is what shows. So what I need to do is actually invert that. So over here in my inspector, I'll click invert mask, and now I have exactly the opposite. The outside is a still frame, and the opening will show through down to the video layer, so that the only movement we have is what is inside the mask area. So I'll add a little bit of feather to that mask. Here's the feather. I'll just turn that up 28 anywhere between 20 and 30 points is going to be enough for this particular project. You may have to play around with it with your video file. But that is the base bones of how to do this. Now all that's left is for us to convert this to a GIF. So I'm going to Command E, Command Export. Go to my settings. I'm going to make sure that's ProRes so we have the highest quality. I will click Next, export it to my desktop. Click Save. And then when that finishes loading, it'll pop up on your screen. Now all we have to do is take this video file that we just created and convert it to a GIF so that it'll play back on the internet with an infinite loop. So what I'll do is I'll open up Photoshop. I'll go to File, Import, Video Frames to Layers, and I'll select that Cinemagraph video that we exported. And I can use the default settings. Just make sure that Play from beginning to end is selected. Make Frame Animation is selected. Say OK. It will load into Photoshop. I currently have my timeline window selected so that I can see what's going on down here. And I can just give it a quick play just to make sure that it is going to play back with a perfect loop. It looks good to me. So I'm going to hit stop and I'm going to go to File, Export, Save for Legacy Web. And now my GIF settings will pop up. And one quick note on this is that GIFs only allow for 256 colors. So you want to make sure that when you're doing your original recording that you're not choosing a video source that has a wide range of colors, or that's going to be a problem in a GIF format. But for this, we really only had the greens and these purples and blue hues, so it's going to work out pretty well for us. So I've got my colors set to 256 right here, and then I'll click Save. I'm going to save that to the desktop for now, and we should always name our files, so I'll name this Zen Fountain Cinemagraph, and I'll click Save. Now, one final note, if you're working with a file that does have more colors and the 256 just looks really blotchy and isn't working for you, there is one workaround where you can work with a format called WebM. It's a video format for the internet, but basically the way that you would work with that is you would take your original video file that we created. You would just go on to the internet and you would type WebM converter, and this first return here, cloud convert, basically you would load that video file here. It would convert it to WebM and give you one to take away. And that WebM is going to create some HTML coding that you're going to have to take care of to create the infinite loop, but that's a different topic. So what I want to show you now is the file that we just exported. So here's our file. The way you check your GIF files, you right-click it, say Open with Chrome. It'll open up in Google Chrome, and this will give us the infinite loop preview. And we'll make sure we watch it through so it loops a couple times. And this loop looks really, really good. So we are done. And that is how you create a Cinemagraph edit using Final Cut, converting with Photoshop.